hopefully receive some good information and teaching from this program, and we hope to expand on it and improve upon it in the future. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Once again, my name is Makonnen Tendaji. I am the SoCal Black Community Programs Director for the African Black Coalition. This is PE with ABC lesson number 4. This is our final lesson, and today we're going to be talking about the Black Campus Movement. And I'm making it a sort of tradition or a part of the routine, if you will, for us to play this clip, this brief clip that Kwame Ture is featured in. It's from a lecture that he gives later in his life. And it is basically explaining the notion of constant political education. And we first introduced this concept in our program last week, and we want to review it today and again, incorporate it into our programming moving forward. And what this means, Kwame Ture will explain it, constant political education, is the idea that as a people, as a group of people with intelligence and resources and opportunities and all these different things, we have to be sure that our political education not only is being reinforced, but is constant in that reinforcement. And Kwame Ture really lays it out clearly and concisely to us in terms of the significance of this concept. So let me go ahead and pull this clip up for us all.
You know, the truth is very simple, but sometimes implementation of the truth, that's where difficulty arises. The word is constant, political education. Constant. I mean, like they are. You know, whether you want to know something about the OJ trial or not, you don't know something about it in this country today. Whether you want to or not. Now, I don't care about it, really. You know, what you do about it? He ain't never did nothing for us. Why care about it? Well, he might go, you know, they might lynch him. Well, they've lynched better Africans in that unjust system. You know, sorry, that's not my problem. But you cannot get around it. Because they're constant, constant, constant. The example we give all the time is clear. Every child in this country over 8 years old knows about Coca-Cola. Yet Coca-Cola doesn't stop putting up signs or whistling jingles. So we must be as enthusiastic about winning our people over the struggle as Coca-Cola is about selling Cokes. Theirs is constant. You can't hardly turn without hearing buy a Coke, get a Coke, get Coke, get Coke, get Coke, get Coke. I mean, it's just a fact. It's just a fact. As a matter of fact, they can bring it to your bedroom. That's what they do. So when you go to sleep, you see. When you get up, you see. I'm going to bed. Give me a Coke. I'm getting up. Give me a Coke.
So there we have it. Again, a real brief understanding in terms of the idea of constant political education and the importance of it in our daily work. And there's another lecture that Kwame Ture gives, and he basically says that the enemy does not stop politicizing us, therefore we cannot stop organizing and politicizing ourselves. So just as constant and just as relentless as the enemy is in indoctrinating our youth and poisoning the minds of the masses of our people, we have to be, at the very least, as constant as the enemy in unlearning and relearning what we need to do in order to not only survive, but thrive as a people. So let's go ahead and dive straight into today's topic. Again, we are talking about the Black Campus Movement, and we can understand the Black Campus Movement as a branch off of the Black Power movement in the 1960s. And it's interesting in terms of how we study not only our people and our people's history, but the ways in which that history is represented. So we have the Black Power movement here. And it's crucial for us to understand that as a movement, the Black Power movement was by no means this one-sided, one-dimensional movement. Within the Black Power movement, you had numerous dimensions and numerous sides to it. So if we can think of the Black Power movement as this bubble, we shouldn't study it or analyze it as just a bubble alone, as a bubble in and of itself, if that makes sense. So when we think about how we should study, not just the Black Power movement, but again, the history of our people in general, we need to understand that we are a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, highly complex group of people. So when we think of Black power, we should always keep in mind the ways in which labor, what else? Class, economics, education, and the list goes on and on. We can keep it at these four for now, right? But again, studying the various dimensions of the Black Power movement will help us understand that, okay, within the Black Power movement, you had layers of movements and dimensions of organizing. So if we go from the Black Power movement and we focus on the educational dimension, we'll see the sort of branch off of that education dimension is the Black Campus Movement, or BCM. So let's go ahead and get straight to it in terms of what we have prepared for you all today. And I'll reinforce it here as we usually try to do at the beginning of every lesson, that by no means is this lecture or this presentation an exhaustive, you know, everything you need to know about the Black Campus Movement. Every single one of the things that we produce in our program is intended to be a fundamental analysis, which means it's an introduction into the Black Campus Movement, or it's covering the fundamentals, the basics of the Black Campus Movement. And that isn't to say that you know, really the purpose of that is so that everyone who's tapping in, everyone we share this information with, can use this as a catalyst to dive into that deep and that rigorous study. So again, the purpose of us exploring the Black Campus Movement fundamentally today is that so once this course ends, we all can go into our respective areas and do further research. So again, the Black Campus Movement is this branch off of the educational dimension of the Black Power Movement. So we can consider it to be Black student organizing during the height of the Black Power Movement. Oh, here we go. Oh, and for those who are new to the program, the best way we keep the program interactive is that we utilize the chat box for folks to give their input. And we're gonna do that now. So with these quotes that we have in front of us on our screens, open up the chat box and then give your thoughts on the both of them. I'll read them. So the first one, work at the university must therefore be so organized that it enables the students upon graduation to become effective servants. For servants they must be. The masters of us educated people are and must be the masters of the people. That comes from Julius Nyerere, who was the first president of Tanzania. So let's just break it up piece by piece. So again, take a few moments, read over this first quote from our ancestor and really break down what you believe it is attempting to convey, if that makes sense. What's the big idea? What are we supposed to gather from what is being told to us? So again, take a few moments, think to yourself, reflect on the quote, and then respond in the group chat to the group what you think this means, and then we can kind of share what we got out of this. Okay. Use the degrees and skills to build for our communities. Yes, indeed. And again, when we do these reflections in the group chat, there isn't any wrong answer necessarily. Really, the purpose of us doing this is so that we can really just measure what we each take away from what we're reflecting on. And what that does is it sparks new ways of thinking and understanding and analyzing not only the words and the teachings of our ancestors, but how we can apply those contemporarily. So again, take a few moments, reflect, read it if you need to. And in the group chat, it doesn't have to be, just a response. It could even be a clarifying question, right? So somebody could ask, what exactly do they mean by this? Or, again, questions, comments, answers, everything is anything and everything is welcome. So take a few moments and then respond in the group chat. Just reflecting on just this first quote from Julius Nyerere. We'll dive into Thomas Sankara shortly afterwards. But yeah, take a few moments. Just to answer on that, okay, let me see. It reminds me what I talked about in my graduation speech to work in which we put it on campus. Does not end our college experience to us. Yes, we are Black students, we are Black people first. Yes, indeed, and always. Being OS on campus is the beginning of being OS for a lifetime. There it is. Boom. And that's crucial when we understand the time span or the time span of our activism. And oftentimes, a large majority of us find that activism in college or in school, right? But it is crucial for us to understand that by no means is there a ending on that time span. So if I'm a college student and this is my first year in college, I shouldn't be framing it in the sense of, okay, I'm going to be active and involved in BSU or whatever the efforts are. And then once I graduate, I can close the book and I'm moving on. That shouldn't be the goal. Really, it's the starting point from which we dive into our activist work. That's a crucial point for sure. So while we are reflecting on this first quote from Julius Nyerere, I'll read the second one from Thomas Sankara. Down with those who hide behind diplomas paid for by the sweat of the people, who are incapable of serving the people, but who use their diplomas to speak in the name of the people. This comes from Thomas Sankara, who was the first president of Burkina Faso. Two of our mightiest warriors here. So now take the time, reflect on both of these quotes here. And when we reflect, we should be looking for words that are familiar to us, maybe concepts that are familiar to us, and even those that are not. So maybe we're reading something and we're reading it for the first time, or we're reading it and we're having trouble understanding it. That's okay. That's what we're here to do, is to, grow our collective critical consciousness. So take a few moments and then respond in the group chat what you believe to be sort of the meaning or the message of both of these teachings here. We should use our education/university experience to be a tool to organize our people as well. Yes, indeed. Question, where did Julius Nyerere go to school? That's a good question. For the Dexter, I'll have to look into that. I'll make a note of that and get back to you. So again, take a few moments and reflect. Identify and neutralize those who appear to be with us but work against us in the interest of our enemies. Absolutely. And what Thomas Sankara is saying is really multifaceted and profound. So not only does he say that we need to identify and confront those who hide behind the diplomas paid for by the sweat of the people, but who actually use those same diplomas to speak in the name of the people. So the question becomes, how can one of our own take advantage of the opportunities given to them and then betray those opportunities and then turn around and say that what they're doing, the work that they're doing, is in service of or in the name of the people. It's one of the highest forms of treason. When we think about, and Kwame Ture talks about this also, when he says that the masses of our people shed blood for us to sit in the college classrooms that we sit in. So it's the question of how much do I need to reflect, not how much, when we think about how we should appreciate the value of the spaces that we are in, we have to understand that quite literally our ancestors died and shed blood and fought for us to be in that space. So everything we do going forward is not for our own individual gain, but it's for that of the masses that shed their blood for. That's crucial. Thoughts on the second quote: stop going to college and forgetting where you came from, acting like you're better than the streets, people that made you long before that diploma did. Yes, indeed. And Kwame Ture actually articulates this point in one of his lectures. He actually speaks on how the masses of our people do things and sacrifice themselves for things they will never attain for themselves. He talks about how people who are illiterate shed blood and die for people to go to school and get educated. People who will never vote die and shed their blood for our people to become mayors, right? And those are just two examples of the many more that he gives. So it's up to us, again, to appreciate not just the value of the space that we occupy currently, but what was put into that space prior to us entering it, right? Crucial for us to understand. All right, so let's get straight to it. The Black Campus Movement, there are two books in particular that we are going to focus on, or that we revolve our research on. And these are two critical texts, two contemporary texts. The Black Revolution on Campus by Martha Biondi. This actually came out, let's see, 2016, I want to say. 2012, this one. And then the Black Campus Movement, Black Students and the Racial Reconstitution of Higher Education, 1965 to 1972 by Ibram H. Rogers. He's known now as Ibram X. Kendi. This came out also in 2012. These two books right here, again, when we talk about the in-depth analysis that goes beyond PE with ABC, look no further than these two books right here. And these two books are the very basis for this presentation that we're going through right now. Okay, a quick excerpt from Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. This excerpt, it pretty plainly outlines it. It discusses the role of students. And again, when we think about the responsibility we have in the spaces that we occupy, this is an efficient excerpt for us to pull from. So he says that the youth belong to the revolution. Our universities, colleges, and schools in enemy-held and contested zones can become centers of revolutionary protest. Students should establish close links with the workers and provide the spark needed to set in motion demonstrations, strikes, boycotts, and armed insurrection. Effective student worker cooperation can paralyze a reactionary power structure and compel change. In liberated areas, students must constantly guard and revitalize the revolution. On our youth depends the future of Africa and the continent's total liberation and unity. So again, we're going to get active in the group chat box. Reflect on this excerpt. What do you think Kwame Nkrumah is trying to teach us? When we read this, what is there anything that we may be confused on? Maybe there's something that we're having trouble understanding, or maybe not. Maybe we understand it clearly. Basically, from reading this, write down in the group chat what you get from it, what it's teaching you, how it makes you feel, how it makes you think, all the above. So take a few moments and go ahead and do that. The student is a powerful piece on the chessboard. Get that strategic from there. Yes, indeed. And Kwame Nkrumah actually, throughout his handbook of revolutionary warfare, he goes on to further explain the different strategic positions in which we occupy. And students in particular occupy a very unique and a very strategic position, and he articulates it here. He says that effective student-worker cooperation can paralyze a reactionary power structure and compel change. He says that in enemy-held and contested zones, students he says that in enemy-held and contested zones, those places can become centers of revolutionary protest. And we have to think, well, what is an enemy-held zone? What is a contested zone? And he articulates it here. If we think, if I go to, I don't know, UCLA, where the Black student population is less than 5% of the total student population, could we argue that that's an enemy-held and contested zone? I would argue yes, so would Kwame Nkrumah, right? When we think about the different institutions that we go to and attend, we have to really ask ourselves, are we in friendly territory? And not in an abstract sense, but in a very literal sense, in a tangible sense. If I'm less than 2% of the population of a place over 20,000, I have a very, very small body of friendlies. I have a very small body of friends, right? In the very literal sense. So we have to understand that it goes beyond just, us thinking, oh, I just go to school, right? We have to really analyze the positions in which we occupy. What else? The role of the student is really important, especially college students. They have the power to change the school system because they are the voice of the school. And without the students, there wouldn't be the school. Indeed. Sister Honey Blue, what's the deal? Colleges and universities are direct ties to the power structure at hand. Corporations gain profit from these institutions. However, we as students who may be in these spaces have direct effect on the culture's campus. Therefore, if we do as Kwame implies, we can achieve and fuel the revolutionary change engine that is needed for the moment and upward mobility of our people nationally. Campus culture. So y'all better go off. All right, we get loose in the group chat today. That's funny. All right, let's go ahead and keep it rolling. H. Rap Brown, who was now known as our brother, our warrior Jamil Al-Amin, he articulated back in the 1960s that the education that a Black college student gets will be irrelevant, fruitless, and worthless unless they use it to define and articulate positions that are relevant to Black people. If there's one teaching that I can just point to and use or reference when somebody asks, what's the significance of being Black in college, or what's the significance of being a Black college student? I'll give them this response right here, right? And if someone were to ever ask, how can a Black college student betray their education? Well, if they get an education that is not used for the people, right? If I go to school and I study economics, once I finish school and I don't go back to where I came from and use that economics degree to better my people economically, that entire education I received is irrelevant, fruitless, and worthless. And this is the attitude that was consistent throughout the Black campus movement as a whole. So again, referencing H. Rap Brown of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He championed Black studies at City College in New York in October 1967. And then in November at Columbia University, he criticized American universities as propaganda mechanisms for white nationalism. He called on Black students to apply their education to changing the world and advancing Black America. And this notion of American universities operating as propaganda mechanisms is very critical when we, again, understand and come to appreciate the strategic nature of the positions that we occupy. We're not just going to school. We're not just getting a college degree. Everything has this very political theme to it, or this political context attached to it. And we have to understand that. And again, he puts it simply, Black students need to apply their education to changing and serving Black people. If a Black student goes to college with any other motive or purpose, they're betraying the masses who shed blood for them to go to school, period. All right. So briefly, this is just not a side note, but it's a crucial point for us to, again, understand when we talk about enemy held and enemy contested zones, right? So HBCUs, and we can understand an HBCU as a historically Black college university. Now, there are a plethora of them, and we're not going to dive into the arguments of which one is the best or whatever, right? The only ones that we're going to focus on for this brief sort of portion of the lesson is Howard University, Morehouse College, and Spelman College. Now, think to yourself in your mind what you know or what you may have heard about, one, the idea of HBCUs, and two, these three HBCUs in particular, right? So just think to yourself, okay, I know this, I've heard this, all that stuff. So when we think about an HBCU and the functionality of a historically Black college or a historically Black university, right? Rarely do we think about these people. Now think to yourself, right? What could be the connection or the relationship between these three individuals and those three schools, right? And again, when we talk about understanding Kwame Nkrumah when he says our universities, colleges, and schools in enemy-held and contested zones, this is a prime example of that discussion, of that topic, right? So again, Howard University, Morehouse College, Spelman College, right? Juxtaposed with these images, with these individuals right here. These are white people, yes. I know the pictures are in black and white, but these are white individuals, yes. So again, the question becomes, what is the relationship between these three white individuals and these three white, and these schools, right? So we have here, right, Oliver O. Howard, Laura Spelman Rockefeller, and Henry Lehman Morehouse. These are three white individuals who these three institutions are named after. And even deeper the deeper that we dive, we can see that all three of these individuals were instrumental in the building, the literal building and funding of these institutions, right? And when we think about the historical and political nature of education, we have to understand that, okay, we have these things called historically Black colleges and universities, but how far back does that history go? Where does it start, right? Where does it end? All these different things. What are the different nuances to a school being dubbed a historically Black college and university, right? Howard University, arguably one of the most prominent HBCUs, isn't even named after a Black person. And again, we're not going to get into the debate of, go to HBCUs, don't go to HBCUs. That's not the point of the discussion today. The point of the discussion today is, as intellectuals, as students, right, we have to be students in the true sense of studying and investigating these places of so-called higher learning, right? So further along in Ibram Rogers' the Black Campus Movement, he also talks about how the historical nature of HBCUs cannot be, obscured, right? So he says, at the dawn of Black higher education in the mid-19th century, white presidents, administrators, and professors were the norm at HBCUs, and that many HBCUs resembled plantations with Black and white slave drivers for presidents, powerless faculty as slaves, students as the cotton, and corporate capital as the slave holders. Again, the point of the discussion here is not for us to get into the debate of, why you shouldn't go to HBCU or why you should, or we're not in the business of comparison. Again, all we're doing here is conducting historical analysis of these institutions, right? And that no institution is above critique. We can't just look at HBCUs we can't just treat Howard and go, oh, protect Howard at all costs. You know, that's our place, and not do any analysis. That's an ahistorical and backwards approach to the things that, you know, we understand, right? The page for this quote in particular, let me go through the book. I got all these notes and stuff up in it. This isn't even my book. I know for a fact that in this, these two quotes in particular come from the first chapter when Ibram Rogers or Ibram X. Kendi is really articulating the sort of precursors to the Black campus movement in the 1960s, right? I'm gonna find it though. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so chapter 1, page, oh, I lost it, where'd it go? Here we go. Chapter 1, page 14, right? And again, this is in chapter 1 where Ibram X. Kendi is talking about not just the history of the Black campus movement, but prior to that, right? Oh, let me check this group chat here. When does Black people group creating schools that they have the Black people in mind? Okay, good question. So in the formation of these HBCUs, the question that's being posed is, was educating Black students the idea in mind? The answer is yes. Now, we have to dive deeper and really decipher people's intentions, because we can look at, even today, we can look at different corporations and, you know, organizations, quote unquote, nonprofits, who have these very valiant missions and objectives, right? Helping people of low incomes, right? People of, you know, the list goes on and on, right? I don't want to get too sidetracked. So to answer the question, right, in the creation of these schools, were Black people in mind? Yes. Again, it isn't just a yes or no. We have to dive deeper and say, okay, if Laura Spelman, Oliver O. Howard, right, and Henry Lehman Morehouse built these schools with the intentions of educating Black people, we always have to investigate and ask, okay, what did they get out of it though, right? Because never in history, and this is not just me saying this, this is historical fact, never in history have white folks given Black people anything just because, right? Out of benevolence, right? Or out of altruistic, you know, sentiments. There's always a transaction, right? Something that they get out of, in return, right? What else? Let's see. When did? And again, before we move on, again, this is not my attempt to, you know, tear down HBCUs and say, yeah, don't go there. No, that's not the intention. Again, the intention is for us as scholars and thinkers to be true scholars and thinkers and to really investigate these places that exist in society, right? Okay, so moving on now to some early organizing within the Black campus movement. The American Federation of Negro Students was the first national Black student organization in US history. It was founded in the winter of 1923. They had a founding conference at Howard University in April 1923. Their slogan that year was "A More Progressive People." And this organization, this is crucial, resolves for the inscription of race relations and Black history courses in the college curricula and pledged to launch 3 drives: business cooperation, the stimulation of race pride, and the encouragement of education. What's so crucial about the early organizing of Black students and why that's so important for us to study is because when we think about Black studies and Africana studies and ethnic studies, we automatically, for those who have knowledge, automatically go to the 1960s, right? 1966, 1968. That's when it all started. And while that isn't necessarily false, there's a deeper and a richer history to that. And even in Ibram X. Kendi's book, he talks about how the Black campus movement of the 1960s was not this anomaly. It didn't just come into being in 10 years, right? There were decades of buildup to that. The American Federation of Negro Students is a prime example. In 1923, our people were talking about studying our history in school. 1923 was almost 100 years ago, right? 40 years prior to the Black campus movement. So again, when we study our history, we have to be sure that not only are we studying our history, but we're studying our history thoroughly. Now onto the radical nature of Black campus activism and Black campus just organizing in general, right? When Black campus activists were not being harassed, injured, or killed, they were being expelled and arrested. Black campus activists around the nation also had to face criminal courts, arrests, suspensions, expulsions, and police brutality during their effort to racially reconstitute higher education. This cannot be emphasized enough. As Black people, specifically as Black college students, we cannot expect to organize and build seriously without facing opposition, without undergoing retaliation. And if we make it through our 4 or 5 years of college and we are active and we never face any kind of repercussions or consequences, if we just get by scotch-free and we go, man, I was BSU president for 4 years and we never encountered any problems, you weren't really working, you weren't really moving, right? You weren't engaged in those activities that were seriously threatening to shake up the powers that be, to overthrow the status quo. So again, understanding the consequences and the real polarizing nature of Black campus activism is crucial. So now, we're just gonna look at a few historical examples within the Black campus movement of this retaliation, right, that our people faced. And this very real retaliation, we're not talking about just, I got a D instead of a C in this class because of my BSU work. No, we're talking about our people, again, shedding blood, losing their lives, right? The Houston riot, May 17th, 1967. And we are reframing it as the Houston Rebellion. And real quick, a sidebar. Hold on. Quick sidebar. This is very, very crucial. Again, when we talk about how we frame history, not only how we frame it, but how we study it and the different nuances of it, we have to be sure that we are utilizing the proper terminology. So historically, and in the books that we didn't write, the Houston Rebellion that took place in Houston, Texas, is referred to as the Houston Riot. The reason why we need to reframe it as a rebellion is simple. And I'll give the example of this distinction that needs to be made. I'll give the example of a fireworks versus a bonfire, right? So we think about riot versus rebellion, and these two words are not the same. They're very distinct, right? They don't mean the same things. So we can compare a riot to like burning fireworks. And what happens when we build fireworks? We have our rocket or whatever. We set it on the ground. We take our lighter or our match. We light the fuse, and the fuse is not very long. The fuse is actually very, very short, right? So when we light it, we have to run away, right, without, out of the safety of getting our fingers, blown off. So we light the fuse, we dash away, pew, 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 pow, pow, pop, right? These lights go off. It's a very nice thing to look at. So we sit and we look at it and we go, wow, that was nice. And one firework doesn't last forever, maybe last 30 seconds, a few minutes at that. And then it's over. And then we, woohoo, light more. Or if that was the last one, all right, good show. That's lighting fireworks. A bonfire, on the other hand, there are materials required, there's planning, there's preparation. If all of us in this Zoom are gonna have a bonfire, right? But there's no planning or preparation in terms of who's bringing the wood, who's bringing the lighter fluid, who's bringing the charcoal, et cetera, et cetera. We're all gonna show up and expect everyone else to have what we need. Oh, I don't have the wood. I thought you were gonna bring it. No, I was supposed to bring this, or no, right? And we don't get a bonfire. So a bonfire requires that planning. We have to say, okay, I'm gonna bring this, you're gonna bring that, you're gonna bring extra this, you're gonna bring this just in case we can't find this. And then we show up with our materials planned and prepared, and then we put our bonfire together and we organize, right? We execute what we wanted to do. And the difference between fireworks and a bonfire is where fireworks have a short fuse and they light off, their lights are shining and the colors are nice and woohoo. We don't get warmth from that though. We get a good feeling. We get something nice to look at, right? But we don't get the warmth of a bonfire. We don't get the longevity of a bonfire. So we can frame a riot as lighting fireworks and a rebellion as planning and executing a bonfire. From a rebellion, there's planning, there's preparation, there is organizing, there are different materials that have to come together. And then once a rebellion takes place, there's longevity, there's warmth or an objective that has to be attained. With a riot, a short fuse, no planning, it just as quickly as it starts, it ends. That's the distinction made between a riot and a rebellion. And again, it's important for us to frame our history properly, because if we think about all of the different instances of insurrection and rebellion our people have undergone, they've required planning, preparing, all these different things. So for people to frame them as just riots is to downplay the thought process, the critical thinking that has to go into planning a rebellion. So again, riot versus rebellion. A riot, lighting fireworks, getting a nice light show, right? Feeling good about looking at something, but not getting any actual good feeling from it. And then a rebellion, a bonfire, planning, preparation, materials, coming together, making it happen, experiencing the longevity, getting warmth from it, right? Just a quick sidebar. Okay, so back to the Houston Rebellion. Texas Southern University, that's the TSU-5. The TSU-5, these are 5 brothers who lost their lives during this rebellion. Treswell Franklin Jr., Floyd Nichols, Charles Freeman, Douglas Wayne Waller, and John Parker. And it's crucial for us to look at not just these names, but these ages. We have to frame the history of radical Black student organizing as who we are today. So in the 1960s, our ancestors were putting in this work, and fast forwarding to today, we're in that exact same position, right? We are this age, we're 18, 19, 20, 21, leading up to our 30s, whatever the case is, right? This is us that we're studying. So the Houston Rebellion. At Texas Southern University, after a 3-hour stalemate with student snipers that lasted into the early morning of May 17th, the police fired more than 2,000 shots into the dormitory with rifles and carbines. After 40 minutes of gunfire, which wounded at least 1 student, the police officers stormed the dormitory. 1 officer was shot and killed, and 2 others were wounded during the swarm. The officers then ripped apart the dorm, hospitalizing several students, and found 3 guns. With guns pointed at their backs, almost 500 students were compelled to lie face down on the cold, wet ground before being arrested. Now, this is a very brief coverage of this rebellion, but in it contains a lot. And I want us to really reflect on each piece of this rebellion. 3-hour stalemate with student snipers. Student snipers, not students with rocks or sticks. Student snipers in position, right? Engaging in gunfire with their enemy, with the police, right? And then in retaliation, the police fired 2,000 rounds into the student dorms. Now, for those of us who live in the dorms or have just been to a college dorm, imagine you're sitting in a college dorm or in your dorm, whomever's, and 2,000 shots ring through. This is not a nonviolent protest or a parade. This is warfare. And our people at the time understood it as such. It didn't just, coil and cower in fear. They got in proper position and executed, right, and retaliated on their own, right? 40 minutes of gunfire took place, wounding at least one student. An officer was shot and killed, and 2 others were wounded. This is warfare, and we have to understand it as such, right? And then again, 500 students evacuated out of the dorm, not for safety, but treated as suspects, treated as the enemy, lying face down outside in the middle of the night, right? So again, imagine you're in the dorms and this happens. And this is not hidden or obscure history. You can Google this for sure, and you can read more into it, for yourself. This comes from Ibn X. Kendi's Black Campus Movement. So this is one example, right, of the very critical nature of organizing within the Black Campus Movement. Our people at the time were not organizing to get good grades. They were organizing to be able to, to have a Black Spirit Week. And nothing's wrong with those things. I'm not trying to trivialize those things. It's crucial for us to put things in their proper context. Rebellions were going on in the 1960s. Students not only were engaging in gunfire, but were engaging in strategic gunfire and actually took some of the enemies with them, right? Now moving on to San Francisco State in 1968. This is the part of the Black Campus Movement that is arguably the most known and the most prominent. A student-led strike on the campus began November 6, 1968, and lasted 134 days. By the time an agreement was finally reached, students and police had violently clashed many times, and about 500 protesters had been arrested. Over several days, faculty support grew, as did the violence between police and strikers. A midday campus skirmish on November 13, 1968 saw 8 youths arrested, several injured, promoting San Francisco State President Robert Smith to suspend classes. Again, when we think about the retaliation that our people endured, they weren't enduring it, surprisingly. They organized and executed different actions, anticipating, expecting repercussions and consequences. And it's crucial for us to understand the really radical nature of Black student organizing during the 1960s. Another historical event that took place during the Black Campus Movement, the Orangeburg Massacre, South Carolina, that took place in Orangeburg, South Carolina on February 8, 1968. The incident began when approximately 200 students gathered on February 6th to protest the segregation of Black patrons at the nearby All-Star Bowling Lane. The first demonstration proceeded without incident. The following night, many of the students returned to resume the protest, but in this instance, 15 of them were arrested. The third night, February 8th, tensions were already running high on both sides from the previous night's arrests. The students gathered on the California State University campus, The students gathered on the South Carolina State University campus instead of at the bowling alley this time. They built a bonfire, which a law enforcement officer attempted to put out. In the process, he was injured by a piece of a banister thrown from the crowd. A highway patrolman then fired his gun into the air in an attempt to calm the crowd. Upon hearing the shot, other officers, thinking they were being fired upon, opened fire into the crowd of students. Hammond and Smith, who were South Carolina State University students, and Middleton, a 17-year-old high school student, were killed. 27 other students were wounded. The high death and injury totals came in part because officers used shotguns with buckshot when they fired into the crowd. Many of the victims were shot in their backs or through the soles of their feet as they ran. None of the students were armed. And these are the brothers who were killed during this massacre. And it always sends, chills down my spine to read and learn and study this event, because it's just so revealing the wicked nature of this enemy, that they would open fire into a crowd of students and shooting, wounding, and killing students as they flee, shooting them in the back and the feet. When we understand the true nature and motives of our enemy, again, we can properly frame our situation here as one of war. They did not see these students as a group of students. They saw these students as enemies of war, and they acted as such. and Delano Middleton, Samuel Hammond, and Henry Smith lost their lives as a result. And if we can really think about this whole process, this whole massacre and how it took place over the course of 3 days. And remember how it was started. It was started because these Black students protested the segregation of a bowling lane. So how do you go from protesting and organizing to desegregate a bowling alley to then dozens of students being wounded and 3 Black men losing their lives? It's a question that can only be answered through the simple answer of, this is a wicked enemy that we are dealing with, period. And we have to treat them as such. Moving on to Black Student Union history, which is a very rich history. The first known group to be named Black Student Union materialized at San Francisco State in March 1966. And I wasn't able to add it here, but this actually came as a result of Black students at San Francisco State University organizing and petitioning to their student government to grant them a organization for Black students. So in March 1966, they received that, right? And then Marion Wadi, Jerry Varnado, Benny Stewart, and Jimmy Garrett led and organized that first initial group. And it's a key thing for us to note that Tricia Navarra, an SF State student, came up with the organization's name, Black Student Union. And up until this happens, you see a variety of different Black student spaces with different names, right? So they had Afro Student Association, Black Student Club, Afro-American Student Association, all the different names. Tricia Navarra, a Black woman, came up with Black Student Union and it stuck, and we use it today. So that's crucial for us to understand, right? And it's important also for us to understand that students founded BSUs to unite and raise the consciousness of the Black student body, which was why many started as study groups. And this is important if we are to understand the origins of Black student unions. And this isn't this isn't an airing out of those who may call themselves Black student unions but don't engage in studying. It's important for us to understand, again, the origins and the history of these things that we, ascribe to and that we, join and get involved in, right? If a Black student union calls themselves a Black student union but does no studying, does no reading of their history, they are not a Black student union. And that's not my own, verdict, that's history. Here's a picture of Jerry Bernardo and James Garrett, the leaders of the first Black student union at SF State. I wasn't able to find a whole picture of the group, so this is the only that I could find. Now again, going back to the retaliatory nature and institutional nature, the institutional nature of the opposition that we face, right? This is a statement from J. Edgar Hoover in 1970. He said that increased campus disorders involving Black students pose a definite threat to the nation's stability and security and indicate need for increase in both quality and quantity of intelligence information. And if any of us know about J. Edgar Hoover, he was the director of the FBI, right, of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And when we read and we look at the nature of an institution like the FBI, we have to ask, how does the activity of Black students relate to the activity of the FBI? And it becomes more and more apparent as we, look deeper into the history, right? Active BSUs were investigated by the FBI, and the FBI kept a running list of prominent activists. Organizational, personal, and ideological conflicts within BSUs were exacerbated by the FBI. It sent forward letters to endanger BSU affairs and manipulated the press. The Bureau, as well as local and state police, recruited, employed, and deployed an army of spies made both of students and college employees that collected data on student groups or thwarted their activities. Again, these are Black students that we're talking about. This is youth, and these types of things were executed in response to the organizing done by Black students. Army of spies, right? Conflicts, campus disorders. These are things that you would equate to a war being waged, right? An institution exacting all of its resources and energy to suppressing and neutralizing, eliminating any threats. So Black student organizing in the 1960s was a direct threat to that institution. And it's important for us to understand, again, that our people in the 1960s were not organizing to just be able to go to school or to be able to do trivial small things. They were organizing and preparing themselves for serious action, and were met with opposition that was just as serious. And we can think Sekou Touré, the Prime Minister of Guinea, once says that if the enemy is not doing anything against you, it's because you are not doing anything. And again, here we have institutional opposition to the organizing of Black students. So we can study the Black campus movement as a direct testament to the fact that Black students in the 1960s and 70s were indeed doing major things, right, that provoked the enemy's response, and not just a light response, but a full-fledged assault on them and on their efforts, right? And these are some key terms here. Key terms, white suasion and Black suasion. These are very crucial for us to understand when we talk about the objectives or the goals that we should be striving for, not just in school, but in our life, right? White suasion is defined as the appeal to the moral conscience of white America to advance the status of Black people. And from this definition, we can think of different examples. And then Black suasion is defined as developing the moral, cultural, and political consciousness of Black people toward the necessity of Black unity, power, and agency. So real quick, in the group chat, come up with examples for both of these terms based on these definitions. So for white suasion, there are a few examples that we could find, or a lot of examples, I should say. And then for Black suasion, come up with a few examples also. So again, take a few moments and respond to, or not respond, but come up with some examples for white suasion and some examples for Black suasion. Okay, white suasion, respectability politics. Okay, very good. Again, examples. These can be, from popular culture, from something you learned in history, anything and everything really, but just basic examples of white suasion and basic examples of Black suasion, right? Based on these definitions. And when we think about white suasion and what it means to appeal to the moral conscience, what does that look like? What are some examples historically, contemporarily, that we can point to where our people have attempted to appeal to the moral conscience of white America in order to advance the status of Black people? And then for Black suasion, what examples can we point to where this goal of developing the moral, cultural, and political consciousness of Black people was, enacted in essence? These are pretty crucial terms. And this presentation and all the presentations from PU with ABC are made available to you all through the PE with ABC syllabus. So as long as we have your email on file, you should have received the PE with ABC syllabus, and on the syllabus has all the presentations. So don't feel like you have to take in all the information this first go round. You can find everything that you see here from that syllabus. Yeah. All right, so wrapping it up, or not wrapping it up, but moving on. June 16th, 1966, Stokely Carmichael, better known as Kwame Ture, calls for Black Power. And it's crucial for us to understand that when Stokely Carmichael first articulates Black Power as an actual verbal phrase, he even says that just because I'm saying Black Power today does not mean that Black Power has not existed prior. It's just this is the first time we actually have a name for this. We can actually call this something. And if anybody ever asks, what is Black Power? What does that mean? What's the definition? Look no further than Black Power, the Politics of Liberation, specifically Chapter 4. Hold on, let me look at the book. Because we thorough with our we are thorough in our analysis. So Black Power, Politics of Liberation, page 44, Chapter 2. It is a call for Black people in this country to unite, to recognize their heritage, to build a sense of community. It's a call for Black people to begin to define their own goals, to lead their own organizations, and to support those organizations. It is a call to reject the racist institutions and values of this society. So again, that's in Black Power, the Politics of Liberation. If anybody ever asks, what is this defined as? What is Black Power? What does that even mean? What's that look like? Look no further than this definition right here. Again, defining our own goals, leading our own organizations, right? Rejecting the racist institutions and values of this society. This is an all-encompassing definition of what Black Power is. And again, just revisiting briefly Kwame Nkrumah's excerpt from his book, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, and how he articulates the role of students. And after learning about all that we learned about tonight, we can look and understand, okay, what is an enemy held in contested zone? What does student worker cooperation look like? What does it mean when Kwame Nkrumah says, on our future depends the future of Africa, on our youth depends the future of Africa and the continent's total liberation and unity? We can point to the very rich and deep history of the Black campus movement and understand what he's really saying. And it's also crucial for us to understand that this book, The Role of Students, or this excerpt, speaks to the entire activity of the Black campus movement. Our people back then understood that it isn't up to just us as students to put this work in. We have to organize and build relationships and links with the workers to put in put in motion boycotts and insurrection and strikes, all these different things. They understood that. So that is all that we have for you this evening. Elimu Huru, that's us. That's our latest political education program. Elimu Huru is Swahili for freedom education. And again, by no means is this presentation the exhaustive, everything you need to know, history of the Black campus movement. If again, these two books, to my knowledge, are the most in-depth analyses of the Black campus movement. So please cop these two, and then you can do the real in-depth research for yourself to really dive into what the Black campus movement is and what it was and how we should utilize it in our work today, right? Let me do this real quick. Boom. So again, that is all that we have for you all. This has been a blessed journey, PE with ABC. This is lesson number 4, the Black campus movement. Yes, these books are listed in the syllabus. And then at the end of this, you should receive the link to complete the post-evaluation for this course. Please fill that out. That helps us in terms of understanding how we can improve and how we can better the program. And by no means is this the end of, political education with the African Black Coalition. So what the plan is that these Zooms will be put together on a monthly basis starting in May. And then we're going to organize more like weekly webinars within a month. We're aiming to have one during Black August, and then another one in the winter time, probably December, and then again in February. But again, up until that point, we'll have monthly webinars. And we all have your information, so you'll all have access to that, don't worry.